Welcome to Talk is Cheap. Today we have a special. About a month and a half ago, I went ahead and covered the Venus project on Talk is Cheap. And we had a pouring of comments and questions, a lot of questions. And we had two people from the Venus project reach out to us, and they wanted to know if we wanted to do a sit down and answer some of these questions. So we asked you, the viewer, if you had any questions, which we do have. We have a few of our own. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce, of course, Daniel, because he's here.
I'm here.
Hey, there he is.
Yeah.
How are you doing today, sir?
I'm pretty excited for this interview because if this comes out, it can really change the world.
I think so. I agree 100%. That's the reason I was so passionate about it in the first place, and I'm really happy to be here now. Of course, and with us, I should probably introduce, is Sue Everett and Saso. Oh, I'm going to mess that last name up. How do you say
That's fine. Luznar.
Luznar. Oh, I like that accent. So I'm going to let Sue and Saso go ahead and introduce themselves. We're going to go ladies first, of course, with Sue. They're going to tell us who they are, what they do, how they got there, and that type of thing. So, Sue, if you don't mind, take it away.
Sure thing. Hi to everybody. My name's Sue Everett, and I was born in the UK, but I've been living in Spain now for 38, almost 39 years. And I'm just a mum. And I work as a receptionist for some medical centres, a small company of medical centres. And I've been involved with the Venus Project now for about 8 or 9 years. I can't honestly remember how long. I started by helping with the translations into Spanish of all the videos and the material that there is from the Venus Project. And the more I translated, the more I was learning, and the more I liked it, and the more I got into it. And finally, it kind of all rolled into one thing, rolled into another. I became the point of contact for Spain, for TVP, for the Venus Project. We abbreviate it to TVP. And then there was a need to organize all the points of contact around the world because there were very many of us, but we weren't really meeting up or anything. So along with Saso and a couple of others, we put our heads together and we made a proposal to Roxanne and Jacque to try and restructure what is the support teams around the world. And so that's what we do now as well. Both Saso and I are admins for that. So that's me. Is that brief enough?
Yes,
do we take anything back?
No, that was really well. One quick question. You said something about training. Would you mind covering that, what you had to go through to become an admin, say?
Okay, well, the training is an unusual word. We don't usually say unusual word. We don't usually say training. We usually talk about learning about this direction. It's a funny thing, but if you tell people they have to study or they need to educate themselves, there's like a mental barrier comes up because it takes us back to school, and most of us didn't really enjoy school very much, and the thought of having to study again. But by watching videos and reading the website, and if you can treat yourself to the book, the best that money can't buy, gradually you absorb these ideas. And we do for the points of contact, we have an orientation process, which is very basic. We give them some tools to work with to be a point of contact. It's like a coordinator role. And we also go through some of the most important material that the Venus Project has produced.
Is this something you do online, or do you actually travel somewhere to get this?
No. Oh, I wish. I wish we could travel. No, we do it all online.
Okay.
Because we've got people all over the world. You know, we've just finished one orientation process, and we've now got a guy in Iraq, for example. We've got people in Australia. We've got people all over the States. We've got people in Europe. So we can't meet up physically. But in actual fact, even online, it's difficult because of the different time zones. Mm-hmm. You know, it might be 9 o'clock for me, but for somebody else, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. So they can't make those meetings or whatever, you know. So it's extremely complicated. Plus, of course, as well as having our online commitments, we also have our offline lives and commitments, which can surprise us in fun ways by, you know, the boss has given me another full day of work or something, and I haven't got time to do whatever I had to for the Venus Project, you know? Mm-hmm. Or maybe somebody gets poorly and you've got to go to the doctors, or, you know? So there's all sorts of things that can interrupt us trying to be volunteers, because, of course, we're all volunteers. Mm-hmm. And, sorry, did I answer your question, or did I go off on a tangent?
So what was this training about? Like, did you have to cover so many hours, or how in depth did this go?
Well, the orientation process is 21 weeks. And we meet with the study groups every week on the same day at the same time. So we have a group of people who can commit to 21 weeks, for example, Tuesday at 7 o'clock. And every Tuesday at 7 o'clock for 21 weeks, we meet up, the host, the mentor, as it were, and then the students, the candidates of POC, and we go through a topic, whether it's organizational or whether it's material from the Venus Project. We go through it. The sessions last up to 2 hours. There is homework to do as well. They have to watch something for the following week so that we can discuss it more heavily. And that's what we do with the points of contact. But when they finish that, that's just the very beginning. They haven't learned everything about the Venus Project, far from it. So what we then recommend them to do is to go into the Socio-Cyberneering Education Project, which is all the material that's available from the Venus Project in depth. And it can take a long time. It depends how much effort you put into it, but it could take you 2 years because you can do it at your own time. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting. Both Sasha and I are doing that as well. We're students, as it were. We have a mentor who explains the material to us if we have any doubts and so on.
Oh, very cool.
And the more you learn, the more you realize that there is to learn and the more challenging it is. And it's just pieces, just like a huge puzzle, like a huge jigsaw puzzle. The pieces start to fit together.
So is this just training? This is just training to get information to get out to people? Or are you guys actually trying to get something concrete starting to roll?
Yes, these points of contact, then their main focus is to build a team of people who want to be active in their area or in their state or in their country, and create events, maybe show a screening of one of the documentaries, or maybe participate in a festival somewhere. And so, to get the word out. So it starts, we prepare them to be a point of contact, and then they get an email and a Facebook and so on, and then they can reach out to people in their locality or in their country and start building a team of people who want to help. At first, people are usually all over the place. It might be, okay, we've got 3 people in Timbuktu, great, but one is in the north, one is in the south, and one's in the middle, so they can't meet up. Mm-hmm. So you start off being online, and then gradually, small nucleus of people, nucleus of people form, maybe 3 or 4 in one city, 3 or 4 in another city, and then they can do things together. But so we have to be quite creative, quite inventive with the things that we do.
I can see that.
Maybe one thing that I would add here, just for additional clarity, is that many of these things that Sue was talking about, especially these programs that we have now online, have not really been around for as long as me and Sue have been around. So basically, some of the things that we are involved in, we either developed on our own, or other people have developed over time, and they haven't really been even available long enough for us to go through everything. So, for example, the extensive course that Sue was talking about has been out for only the last year, and that's why we're, of course, still going through it as students as well. And then hopefully, as we finish, we can add to it and help others go through it as well. So. Just for clarification, because we've been around for a long time, and I only wish that we had all this stuff when I started off.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm betting. Yeah. And that's, of course, Sasha. We got a little further ahead than introductions, but do you want to introduce yourself then, sir?
Yeah. So my name is Saso Luznar. I'm originally from Slovenia. I've been living here in the U.S. now, currently in New Jersey, for the last 2 years. And I've gotten involved with the project about 7 years ago. And like I mentioned before, it was very different when we started off as what it is right now. But I got involved locally first. I was lucky enough to have somebody in a local area that was already connected to the project and familiar with Jacque and Roxanne. And so they helped me get involved in the beginning, which was very important. And then I found more people that were already in the area that knew about the project, and we got together and collaborated through the group. So for me, this role kind of came up organically, as opposed to the way that we have it now, which is I guess a lot more structured. And I for me, as far as getting involved, I didn't really have any background in the topics that we were talking about when I started. But it was just interesting to see anybody just talk about these things that I've never heard anybody talk about, at least not in that way. Kind of breaking things down and then also giving suggestions. Hey, this is what we should do to make things better. That was something that was unheard of for me. So while I didn't agree with everything in the beginning, it definitely piqued my interest enough to check out and see, hey, maybe things are different than what I thought they were. And and they are.
So, maybe you guys want to give a good brief, a synopsis of what the Venus Project is and what you're trying to achieve in your own words. Since we tried to present it, but I think you guys said we had got some things wrong. So take the floor and go for it.
Yeah. So this is kind of a hard question always to try and be brief about. But yeah, it's because it's so many things. But in a nutshell, the Venus Project, of course, is an organization, an active organization, and it is proposing what we call resource-based economy, and that is a holistic global proposal for a redesign of our culture, really. And it's kind of hard to put that in a few sentences, but basically a lot of the mechanisms of today's culture are clearly not working, or let's say not working as well as they should, given that we still have, poverty, wars, all this inequality and all these things. So what we're trying to do with this proposal is we want to test out a different way of doing things, and we want to present that to the world. And like you mentioned before, this can't be done online only. So our goals are, of course, to go to the next step. And Jacque and Roxanne, we've had that privilege of Jacque and Roxanne already making the first step with building this small research center, relatively small research center in Florida, which is on about 21 acres. So there is already something there to see, and Jacque and Roxanne have just done an immense body of work already. So we have this shortcut that we can call, and going through it online, we can know what it's about. We can inform ourselves, and then our goals are, of course, take the next step, go to make bigger research center, or maybe the first test city. And then present that to the world as a functioning demonstration, because that's what people need, or that's what we all need, I guess.
Have you guys been to the one in Florida?
Yeah.
Both of you have? Is it, now here's my number one question. I think I asked you this. Is it self-sufficient, or was there still needing stuff from the outside?
Should I answer that one? Or do you
Go
want to
ahead, Sue.
Okay. I went there for Jacque's centennial event in 2016. And no, it's not self-sufficient. They built the centre 40 some years ago, and they did what they could with what they had at the time. They would have loved to do a lot more. They would have loved to have solar energy. They would have loved to have many different things, but there wasn't the money for it. So they did what they could, but it's still an amazing achievement. You tell them about Irma, about Hurricane Irma and the buildings.
So we had a very practical test of all of Jacque's architecture in the last year. Unfortunately, but I guess now at least we know that the architecture is definitely sound and strong and probably stronger than what it even needs to be for hurricanes like that. I mean, of course, the region of space there is wetlands. So one of the things that is not avoidable is basically water levels. Of course, we know the water gets high, but the hurricane itself, and there was also a couple of local tornadoes that basically just went right over the land. And as far as other than landscaping, there was really no structural damage whatsoever, except for flooding, which just need to be cleaned. And that was it. So so the buildings are exceptionally strong for basically anything that can be thrown at them. And even though they were really made by Jacque and Roxanne's hands, quite literally, and so it's a testament to Jacque's design abilities and engineering abilities, really, to build these structures that he let's say claims are more efficient, are stronger, and can withstand all this weather. And and so this time we had a very, very practical hands-on experience of that, and it showed that it was easily withstandable for without any kind of structural damage. So, but of course, the design and engineering part is not the only thing that we need to test. I would say that it's a bigger challenge to test our social proposals, and it's also a lot harder for people to, let's say, accept and challenge their social knowledge or their social predispositions or the values in general. So that's where the struggle is, and that's why we need a bigger research center where we can demonstrate that more clearly. This is just the scale is just not big enough to have, let's say, a kind of a community of maybe a few hundred or a couple of thousand even people, so that we can demonstrate what the benefits are.
Yeah, because the technology is going to come whether we want it to or not. Technology is advancing, but the important question is, what use are we going to put it to? And these are the things that we need to look at. Are we going to use this technology wisely for the human good and taking care of the planet, or are we going to invent more things to kill each other?
They're good at that. I'll give them that.
And there's a lot of money in it. Disgracefully, there's a lot of money.
Very true. It's interesting. The one big statement question I had when we talked about having questions and doing all this other stuff, I kind of had this thought. So I wrote it down. I was going to wait till the end, but since you just talked about having a pilot city and whatnot, it kind of goes with what I have to say here. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask this one first. It's a little bit long. It's more like a paragraph than a question, so I apologize in advance. But doing the research for the show, and also already knowing about the Venus Project beforehand and really liking the idea and everything else, and the more I read and I thought about it, I also look at debunking stuff, of course, because of the show. Well, I look at what issues people have, like why won't it work?
And there's a lot of those.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And everything that we do, I always like to research both ends so I can kind of have a better understanding. What came to me, what I kind of thought of, and I don't know if it doesn't even matters, but I got 2 degrees, and I did a lot of psychology and sociology because I like that class.
Degrees don't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter at all. I'm in debt. But I would what I wanted to state was, would the Venus Project be more successful? It was tweaked more to fit with the capitalism that we have now, and to make small changes and small steps towards the Venus Project. I believe we have the means to do a lot of what the Venus Project strives for, and I do think that if we put efforts into these smaller tidbits of it, it might be more able for the society to kind of understand and swallow that pill. Now, the reason I say this is you talk about the Venus Project, and you're absolutely right. It's a huge project, and it's really difficult to wrap your head around the idea of, say, circular cities. And this AI that's going to dish it out. I think that's why we had so many people actually talking to us and asking about it. And the question, I guess, and I'm not going to say the whole dang paragraph, but because I have supporting statements and everything else. But is the Venus Project able to take small ideas instead of just like this huge 1,000-person research center, and take smaller bits of it and like kind of like spoon feed these little bits to the society, making small changes where we can, or getting things set up in a different way to kind of make people understand, like to make that smaller step instead of that one grandeur step. Do you think you'd have more ability to have more people kind of buy in if we were to try that? Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Can you give me an example of what a smaller step would be?
See, that was the problem. I do, yeah, because I was thinking about it. The resource-based economy, I think, is a wonderful thing, and I think that's something that we can actually boil down to saying homeless shelters or food for the homeless, or the food banks, because that's pretty much the same thing. You have a donation of food, and then you dish it out. And say we could kind of like make small steps like that to try to help, smaller towns and cities, and kind of step in and say, the Venus Project is going to take over this food thing, and then you can talk to other places, and then you could do that resource base where you can say, oh, we had, I don't know, 60 chickens, and we don't have 60 people that need chickens. So then we took it out to our other food bank and stuff like that, and like. The circular city, which I think is a wonderful idea. And I read a lot of sci-fi, so of course it's in there everywhere. Some guy was talking about how that it always fails. And the biggest way that the circular city actually failed was Epcot. Walt Disney wanted a circular city, and that's what Epcot was supposed to be. And it never got off its feet, and they couldn't understand why. Well, they did some research and find out that people, society, us, we don't like circular cities in reality because it doesn't feel and look like a normal city, which is kind of like the allegory between the Venus Project and where our society is now. It doesn't feel like a city.
See, I like the idea of a circular city.
I love the idea, but it doesn't work because they've tried it like 5 or 6 times, and like even Walt Disney was very upset. It didn't work. So say we took the circular city idea.
It's probably just because people get lost.
It would be so much easier, but it doesn't feel obtainable because all of our cities now are grid blocks, right? So say we took the circular city idea, and this is kind of where I was going with the first place, and we made it into a square, which, I don't think would be the worst thing in the world, but you still had everything in the center. You still had it squared out just like Jacque wanted and everybody else. And then what you do is you present them with a square city, and I think you'd be kind of amazed at how many people would be more acceptable to a square city just because it feels more obtainable. And that's kind of the idea with the whole Venus Project is like, when I was doing the research, is like, this is a huge next step. Like, I want to get involved, but, I'm going to show a documentary or whatnot, like you said, and I think it's great, but I wanted to know what that next step was, like the smaller community side step, and then the city side step, and then the community, and so on and so forth, and bigger and bigger. And that's kind of why I wanted to ask if there was any thought process into that type of getting the information out there more acceptable.
I would just like to take a crack at maybe the first half of this question.
I'm really sorry.
Because I guess for me, one of the projects that I was kind of a part of, let's say during these 7 years, I had a side project which was aquaponics. So you could argue that aquaponics, hydroponics, aeroponics, this is kind of the agriculture of the future. And of course that would be, let's say, a relevant and very likely part of the Venus Project proposal. So that would, in a sense, be a smaller, step that would go towards that. So I had my hands-on experience of that was, on a personal level, it was a great project because I've learned a lot, and I've met people that were, that would obviously into, trying to be more sustainable and showing the demonstrating the improvements that aquaponics can bring and all that stuff. And so from that point of view, I completely understand why you would want to do that, and it does have that part of it that's hands-on, right? I built something, like I built that greenhouse and I built everything that was in it. So it does have that, let's say, immediate gratification to it, which we like generally. One thing that I found is that when you go into projects like that, though, inevitably your, let's say, ability or even time or resources become a lot more limited in your ability to talk about the big picture. Like, you always have stuff to do on small scale. There's always something to fix, something to upgrade, something to do. And so for me personally, I view these subjects as, people are already doing everything. I mean, everything, not everything, but people are already doing most of these side projects on their own. We have enough information, we have enough knowledge, we have enough resources, I'm talking about as society, to implement, pretty much everything. We have people in aquaponics, we have people that are engineers, we have people that are, that have skills that would be needed to put forward the proposal that we, as the Venus Project, suggest. So all of these things are kind of already covered, and so. But what is not covered, what people are not talking about, is the social aspect, is the what to do with these technologies. So I would say, yes, it's more, it's definitely seems more plausible that you're going to see widespread use of aquaponics before you're going to see a resource-based economy. But that is, for me, an extra motivation to talk about the resource-based economy, because I want these, side projects or these technologies, these really great potential technologies that we have, we would like to see them implemented toward a social good, toward a social benefit for everybody, not for people that have the money, not for people that invest in it and all that stuff. And if we can do that, if we can demonstrate that, that would be just so much more powerful than just demonstrating a technology that works. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's, I would say the argument stands. I would say that it's likely that you would see, these things come about faster, and you do get the sense of, hey, I made this and we can use this for the benefit. But this proposal is unique just because it is so, let's say, out of today's frame of reference. And we need that because we need to overcome the things that are the norm today. I don't want to see the things that are the norm today. I don't want to see them in the future. Right. And I think people can overcome the fact that the city is round when they are faced with the fact that, hey, if I want my kids to be, healthy and have a more productive life and not be poor and all that, and I have to move into a circular city, well, I'm willing to make that sacrifice. Right, yeah. You know what I mean?
But to be clear on this, is it the circular city, is it part of the functionality?
Yes.
Yeah.
You see, the whole thing is designed for efficiency. It's very much easier. You can, if you make a circular city, you can make 1/8 and then just repeat it. Okay, so you're saving time in the designing of the city itself, because designing just one building takes a long time. I mean, a long time. So if each building is going to be different, and each part of the city is going to be different, it's going to multiply the amount of hours that are needed to design the whole city. So
and then I guess if robots are spitting these out too, the robot can just keep repeating.
Sorry?
If the robots, they're going to be constructing this, it just makes sense that it would construct.
Exactly. It's like the little cheeses in Trivial Pursuit. You just put them around. And then adaptations can be made according to the needs of the people who live in the houses or whatever. Then adaptations can be made. But that's one of the benefits. Then, of course, it's much easier to get anywhere. If you look at the cities today, they're not actually square. The cities today, when you fly, look down, they are in the shape of a cancer. They just, they really are.
Oh, but Tulsa.
They're awful.
When I lived there, it was wonderful.
You've got narrow streets. You've got one-way direction. You can't park anywhere. You've got to go to the kids at school over there. Your work is over there. The supermarket's there. If you've got time to go to the gym's over there. And you can't park anywhere. And it's absolute madness. They're dirty. They're full of people. But the circular cities, because of course all this goes with the rest of the systems, it's a systems approach. You've got the transport system, which we don't have today. It's appalling. I mean, there in Venus, there aren't even any buses more than once a month or something, So you've got to have a car. Well, we don't need a car, each one of us. We need access to transport that is safe, clean, and efficient, that gets us from A to B as fast as possible and as safe as possible. That's what we need, And so the actual building as well for laying pipes and cables and so on, it's much more easy today. The pipes, and I don't know about where you live, but they lift up the road to put some electric cables in, and then 6 months later they lift it up to do and it's all such a mess. Everything's closed off, and you've got to go 3 miles around to get to your own house because everything's closed off. The cities today are in absolute chaos. So when you look at them as well, the city, the round city with all the greenery in it, with all the lush gardens and everything, it's so much more relaxing.
Agreed.
Well, the one thing I like
anything
also
you'll
is
see from the sky when you look down.
when you got the center, that's where you rent the music equipment or meet people.
Yeah, the
right?
center was the hub of everything.
I like the fact that, hey, if you want to, try to go somewhere, go to the center. It's like, immediately go to the center.
Yep. And I won't disagree. You're absolutely right. And the engineering aspect of that too, like you said, because any problem you find with that 1/8, you can fix there, and then you don't have that next problem with the next 1/8. And on that scale, it is absolutely wonderful. And it really is. I did research on that when I was looking up at circular cities. And like you said, and like even Dan said, robots with a 3D printing and whatnot could literally just get on a track and then do everything. And I don't disagree with any of that. I really do think it's the best way that I've kind of researched what little bit I have on cities. Like I said, I lived in Tulsa for quite a few years, and it's actually on a squid. It's on a squid. Yeah, I'm an idiot. It's on a square grid, and the streets are labeled 11th, 21st, 31st, 41st, up to 101st, and so on and so forth. So if you know what street you got to get to, it was simple. I loved driving through Tulsa, which is an amazing thing to say because it's a city still, but because you knew where you were going, and I can see that with that circular city.
Yeah,
like that makes sense.
If you had a bunch of these circular cities, you would know exactly where everything is if you transfer. I mean, you wouldn't have to go. Do we got to go to 11th Street or 31st? I got to go to the center.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can see that, and I think it's great. I really thank you because that was an excellent explanation.
I didn't finish. I could go on for more.
Well, we got a lot of questions to get through.
I guess what I kind of wanted to ask, I guess, with that question, because after listening to what you were saying, it really made a lot of sense to me, is like the aquaponics and all that, which I absolutely am thrilled about. Could the Venus Project sponsor something like that? And then that way you get that name out there, and then you're starting that interest, because now it's the Venus Project sponsors the aquaponics, and then it's organic, and you can throw that out there. And just to get the name out there, and then you can, that's kind of what I meant, to start those small seeds to grow into something larger.
Yeah, I think this kind of goes with, let's say, the assumption that most people have is that the Venus Project is bigger or has more resources and has a lot of money.
Oh, yeah. No, I understand that. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we do not. I wish that were the case. So where we are at right now is that we are dealing with the problem of making the most that we can with the least amount of resources, which is kind of what we have right now. For suggestions that you were talking about, it would be something that maybe we would want to do in the interim, maybe, in the transition, where we would have some kind of a, where technology of the city, for example, which I'm sure that other people or other countries would see the benefit of, maybe, that would be something that we could provide other countries or other cities with for them to use, and therefore we could say, oh, the Venus Project sponsors this, or the Venus Project's ideas are incorporated in Chicago's whatever, something like that. That's very possible to see that in the future, in this transition period, but at this time, again, this kind of boils down to, well, if we focus on trying to do, let's say, commercial ventures like that, then again, do we have, are we going to have time to talk about the social issues? Are we going to have time to, work on the education, to work on the marketing, to try and get these ideas, social ideas out? So it's so it's always this kind of a tipping sliding scale of what can we do with what we've got.
Yeah, let's make that clear here too. You guys are just volunteering. You're not being paid to do this. All this training you're going through. Yeah, that's very important to state. Because I actually think it helps credibility if you're not being paid.
Oh yeah, I agree. Yeah. Yep. All right.
Well, I'd just like to add a little bit, if I may, to what this topic of the tidbits, as it were, the separate projects and so on. The thing is that these projects and these other organisations, Feed the Poor and so on, they are wonderful and they are doing a great job, but they are only attending to one particular problem, or two at the most. And then the Venus Project proposes a solution, global solutions to all of these problems. All of these problems are already thought about and considered within the concepts of the Venus Project. And attending to one of them on their own won't remove the cause of the problem.
Yeah, understood.
That's what the Venus Project wants to get to, the cause of the problem that we have. There's a saying, you'll have heard it: give a man a fish and you'll feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and he'll feed himself forever. Well, that's what we want to do. We want to teach them how to fish.
Understood. Yeah, and I agree with that.
All right, we don't want to give them just the fish. We want to teach them how to fish, and that's why it's so big, and it's so. As I said before, it's the pieces of the puzzle that fit together and make a whole picture.
But you're not teaching one person how to fish. You're teaching a community how to fish, which is
the whole world.
The world. I like to teach the world to fish.
All right. Well, thank you so much for answering that.
So I think we'll go through some questions that we had, and then we'll hit the audience questions as well. So this whole city is controlled by AI. So how does that work, and what's to prevent like a runaway AI that we've been being warned about from Elon Musk and all these big wigs?
Yeah, that's a great question. That comes up quite a lot. It's all about the use of technology. It's all about what do we apply technology to, and when you're looking at let's say a really big distribution system like the Amazon, Amazon.com that has these millions and millions and millions of shipments going out, so many things to keep track of. That is a technology. It's a piece of technology that we've developed, and we're using it. So, so if we apply these technologies in this format, then, there is no, we shouldn't be scared of what the technology does or it becomes, because it does what we want it to do. I think where the scare comes from is more from today's, again, point of view as far as, what is done with my information? That's what we're kind of scared of is, well, what does this mean if they can see, that I've been, buying or ordering this or surfing on these websites? What does that mean? How can that be used against me? That kind of thing. And then as far as let's say the further development of AI in that sense, I think the question we should be asking ourselves is, let's say, why would you want to develop AI that, let's say, has feelings? Why would you want to do that? What is the ultimate purpose behind it? And I would say that for us, talking about the Venus Project, we see no benefit in that. It's not something that we would want to do from the point of view of implementing that to society. What we need is automated systems that can do exactly what we want them to do. And that's kind of the easiest way, I guess, to describe it. We wouldn't really need any kind of new, supercomputer AI that would be like this all-wise, knowing Tao, where we would all bow to. That's a ridiculous notion.
That's relieving.
There are already programs and technologies out there that are basically functioning on programs as far as how to check the distribution, check the what needs to be provided for, how much do we use, all those things. What we need to do is just consolidate that and aggregate that and apply it with a real social concern and not a monetary background. Oh, how does this benefit me or us or this company? And that's really what we're missing. And in many, let's say, in many separate areas, this is already done. We've already been doing this for quite a while now. The same example with Amazon and whatnot. That's a tracking system that's been up and running now for at least a decade, and it's been improving and improving. So, so just applying that to a design or to the proposal that we're talking about is something that we would do. And as far as anything beyond that, like we said, we don't really see the benefit of that. It's kind of like the example of, well, you want your car to be smart, but do you want your car to have feelings? Do you want it to feel bad because it's parked outside? I don't think there's a benefit to that, right? And then, of course, this can be extrapolated to other things too. And I think that in a lot of areas, I guess this is kind of our society's drive to getting there first is one of the main driving forces behind, hey, I want to make AI that's going to be self-aware or, whatever.
A little bit of a God complex, no?
Yeah.
A bit of a God complex.
So does this tie into governing then? Or how does that work?
Yeah. Yeah, it ties into governance too, because again, this is just a tool. Like I said before, it's not like we would be, asking the computer, hey, how do we, can you govern us because we can't govern ourselves type of thing. It's just that we want to kind of make these personal, political, and just human biases. We want to remove them to the best of our abilities from these decisions that don't necessarily really need a person. You know what I mean? So I don't know, like an example that I usually give is, well, there's, drought in California. I mean, it happens all the time. It's not like we shouldn't expect it. The question is, how do we solve that problem? And once that problem is solved, do you need somebody there to say, hey, there's a drought?
But they have solved it already with the
No, you automate that out. Like you have a system that has, a wide net of sensors that take data and see, there's a diminished water table here and we need to irrigate it. And that in turn turns on the pumps, turns on the desalinization plants in the area, whatever the solution is. And it does away with that problem, and you don't need people to do that anymore. Yeah. And that's a first kind of easy step to imagine how, when you automate other things as well, you don't need all these commissions and committees and what are we going to do, and 300 people coming together and voting on something that they feel maybe it should be done, but they don't really have all the information. They're not experts, all this stuff. It's just so terrible today.
I want to reiterate that point. To touch on that point, technology, they have the technology because they can control when it rains and stuff. They just don't want the public to know yet. So if that stuff's released, obviously it would be released in a Venus project, then you could have it rain.
Well, I mean, all these, let's say what we generally call today with a wide net, conspiracy theories, or, some of them that turn out to be true as we've seen in the past, et cetera. All these things have to do with real human vested interest for some kind of reason. They have some kind of a benefit to keep things from us, let's say, or even from other companies, or from, whatever it is. It's a monetary reason, it's a power struggle reason, it's a, getting more resources reason, whatever it is, or just some kind of personal vanity or whatever. All those reasons are, human reasons. And so eliminating that, and I'm not saying overnight, I'm saying over time in this transition, we would try to do away with some of these biases and some of these emotional decisions that people make based on a lot of time their bottom line or some kind of personal value system that might not be good for us.
money
us
controlling
as the whole
Human
society.
race.
Yeah. I think if you get rid of the money, that's going to take care of a lot of the problems. I want to talk about this, and one of our viewers mentioned it in the comments, Bismarck Perez. So has Jacque ever been visited by intimidators in the government? Have they ever tried to shut him down? Because you think something like this would like destroy their narrative.
I didn't see that question. Where was that?
Well, he worded it. Let me get his right wording. He says, my question would be, how do you think the Cabal is going to let something like this happen?
Oh, right. Okay. That one I did see. Yeah.
So that's the same kind of question I had. I just worded it different.
Okay.
So what do you guys think?
The thing is that the peasants are rising up, but they're wising up. And if we can get the information out to people that there is an alternative way to run the planet, then eventually we can have people on our side. And if we get to the first city or to this new bigger research center that they want to do, or the first city, or maybe the movie, because as well there is a plan to make a movie, this will get the word out as well. But once we have the example there of what the cities can be like, and people can come and visit and feel the environment, experience the environment for themselves, see the use that technology is put to, then they can start saying, this is what we want, this is what we want, this is what they want. And eventually it'll get to the point where the elite are going to lose their power anyway. You know, all these corporations, when people haven't got any jobs anymore because of all the automation and they're not earning a wage, they can't buy what we can still produce. So that means that factories are closing down, businesses are closing down, and, you know, and eventually it will collapse. When that will happen, we don't know, and we hope that we'll be able to get more information out before it does happen. Some people think that we're waiting for the collapse. We're not waiting for the collapse. We'd much prefer to get there before the collapse happens, and it happens progressively anyway. So it depends on us as supporters to do a damn good job getting the information out there to the kind of people who can help us with the first city, so that we can give examples to people, and then politicians can come and visit us, and billionaires can come and visit us, and the man on the street can come and visit us as well, you know, and get that information out there. Start to share start to share technologies with the world to show that we're not a threat, that we really are in serious, that we want to improve things, not make things worse, you know?
Yeah,
so
lead by example.
I'm not really worried about whether the Cabal will let us or not, whoever they are. The elite.
It gets to the point where it's like you can't give a damn anymore, and you just got to go with it. So to your knowledge,
focused on a resource-based economy.
So to your knowledge, Jacque hasn't ever been intimidated by any of those guys.
Well, I have a fun tidbit on that topic as far as some of the happenings in the past. In general, I would say Jacque really, back even before the Venus Project and before he was let's say creating his organizations and trying to get things on the ground, let's say more systematically. I think that he was, this was never a big enough deal for anyone like that to come after him, quote unquote. And even in maybe in the later days since 2008, when these ideas started to get a little bit more traction, a little bit more prominent, he was already in his 90s, so he wasn't the young man in the 50s, 60s that he was back then. So there isn't any information on any kind of problems like that. The only thing that there was back in the this is something that Roxanne would have to confirm the timeline on, but back in the 60s, maybe 70s or something like that, somebody did I guess report him to the authorities, and they, I don't know which authorities that was, but the story is that they came to his door and said, we are the whatever they were from the government, And the first thing that he said was, "What took you so long?" And but then they had an interview basically with him, and he presented to them, what he was doing in his lab, because he was always in the lab. He basically lived in his lab. And then nothing really came of it. They kind of they had a fun afternoon, I guess, together, and he explained what he was doing, etc. And they just saw that there's nothing there.
So somebody probably stupidly just maybe said he was making meth in there or something, and they came and knocked on his
yeah. When they were building the Venus Project Research Center, the police came out. They wanted to make sure that they weren't going to grow marijuana there or things like that. And the firemen came out to see what they were building, because it was just so strange. But then, but interestingly enough, later when they went back to build more buildings, they just told them, "Hey, you don't even have to show us your plans. Like, you guys overbuild. We're just here to make sure that people don't build things that are dangerous for them and whatnot. So you guys just build whatever you're going to build, because it's over the code, and just bring us, the paperwork afterwards." So they were kind of good to them back in those days, even. So that may be just a fun little tidbit on the history.
Cool.
I'm just going to make a comment here. I'm sure you guys will agree. I think a big part of this whole thing would be actually getting rid of the copyright law, because I think the copyright laws, somebody can say, "I filed a patent on that," and then it just gets black boxed, and then you can't bring this stuff out. So I think getting rid of that will start the process of actually being able to develop some of this stuff. And I know one of our audience members commented that too. So if you guys want to make a quick comment on that.
Well, patents for things that the Venus Project has, or patents in general?
It could be anything. Like maybe somebody's got a patent for a self-building robot, or a robot that builds buildings, and they're going to say, "Oh, I got the patent, so you can't do anything with it, so we're going to keep it in the black box."
Right,
so, I mean,
yeah. Well, in a resource-based economy, all that kind of idea would be totally unnecessary.
Right.
Because the idea is that we're much more collaborative. We need to be educated from small in a way that's not competitive.
But therefore, it would have to get rid of the government oversight.
So the idea of having your information open and working together. So, for example, in the future, we'll have a laboratory in Africa, and a laboratory in Japan, and a laboratory in Australia, and they'll all be working on the same project, but they'll all be sharing their information so that they can move along faster.
But would you guys have something in place to
duplicating it? Sorry?
Would you have something in place so you're not under the country's government laws? Like if you build something in the U.S., you're going to have to be under U.S. copyright law. That's the problem.
That's today.
Yeah.
But not in the Venus Project, not in the resource-based economy.
Right, but you would have to start somewhere. That's my thing. So if you're going to start, you would be under the country's.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sasha, what were you going to say?
No. I just wanted to say that I thought that you were not talking about exactly the same thing. I wanted to interject. Sorry. Go ahead, Sue. Yeah.
So the whole patent thing needs to go, but it needs to go when we have a better value system to be able to discern between what is useful and what is not useful, what is ecological, recyclable, easily updatable, that's really fully looked at, not just a good idea because it's pretty, but a good idea because it works, because it serves society, because it doesn't dirty the planet. And so that all that can be open to the whole world. And rather than having one laboratory working on something and keeping their results to themselves, as soon as they know something, they share it with everybody else. So that saves all the other laboratories the same time of having to repeat the experiment just to get there, to discover it by themselves.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Of course, they can test the experiment to make sure that they do get the same results. But that's because that then is using the scientific method to test and make sure that everybody can repeat the results. But it's not the same as having to duplicate the work because that person hasn't shared information with you. So you've got to do it all again. Do you see the difference?
Yeah, just like our scientists do now, with peer reviews and papers and whatnot. And then I think I actually use that in the show. The two scientists in two different countries, I think it was Germany and America, did the same experiment, came up with some different results.
Yeah.
And instead of like, well, piss off, this is mine, and I'm right or right wrong, all they did was they said, all right, they combined their efforts and they redid the experiment to see if they could figure out which one of them is wrong without the idea that failure is a negative, more as we got rid of a variable. So I understand that. It makes a lot of sense.
That's why it's so important if you got rid of that stronghold copyright, because I own that. You can't do anything. It's shut down. That's what happens all the time in these black
But that's
pledges.
also based on, you get a patent for something because that way you can make money off of it. And
They
since
do,
we're talking
but
about...
this is what happens. People build free energy devices. They try to patent it. It gets shut down like that.
Well, that's agreeable too. But I think, and I agree with that. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that if we got rid of, like, where the Venus Project is going, you don't have a monetary system anymore. So then it doesn't... Having a copyright on something doesn't mean anything.
I would love that, but I think the transition is going to be a little tricky on that one. But
Bitcoin's kind of going the right way,
transition will be tricky on
though.
a lot of things because there's still going to be a lot of people that don't understand and so reject the ideas.
Right.
But if we can get enough people well enough informed, then we shouldn't have too many problems. If we can get enough people for the first city, we can do a lot with that.
Absolutely.
So we just need people that are educated. One of the questions in the thing under the YouTube was how do you select people to join or something like that? And I'm supposing that the person means to join in one of the cities. Well, the first city or the first few cities will be experimental and university types. They won't be open to the public in general, as it were, because it's going to be important that they experiment and they put the machinery, for example, to test to make sure that it's safe and so on. And then, so those are going to be engineers, architects, inventors and so on. Those are going to be the people that live in the first cities. And then they can improve on the things because there will be mistakes, they can improve on them for the next city and then for the next city. And eventually we'll be having enough people who have been learning about these new values, who've got a different way of thinking and then that are ready to move into this new way of managing society.
So
because if we go in with the crap that we've got now, all the baggage that we've got, as Jacque says, the primordial slime, nothing's going to happen. If we take all this that we've got now, our culture, our values, our ideas, our biases and so on, we're just going to end up with the same problems that we've got now. So we do have to prepare the people. And this is something that no other society has ever done. They've never looked to think, okay, well, we're moving into the future. We need to prepare the people with different education in the schools, for example. The kids don't even have a laptop each. For God's sake, we're in the 21st century and they're still using pens and books.
Yeah,
agreed.
And what's more, I don't know about where you are, but where I am, the books, you have to buy them every year because the children write in the books, in the textbooks.
Jesus.
It's not like when I was at school, we had the textbook and then your book where you wrote. So that textbook lasted 10 years, But these ones now, which again is capitalism, you have to get a new book for your child every year, and it's a fortune for the parents.
It was funny at Thanksgiving. I was joking around with one of the kids. They asked, "Can I have a piece of paper?" I was like, "This is 2017. We don't use paper anymore."
Yeah.
So.
I just wanted to maybe a quick addition to what we were talking about, just about the patents too, is that one of the reasons why Jacque in his last really 40 years he wasn't paying attention much to making products or developing technologies, just because he knew that there's already enough technology out there to do pretty much all the things that we would want to do to get to a resource-based economy. And so one of the big concerns of his was, well, how do I know that the next technology that I invent is going to actually be doing what I want it to do? Somebody's going to buy it, somebody's going to change it, modify it, use it for, war, whatever it is. And so, that was his attitude. And now I agree with it. At first, I didn't agree with that either. I was like, well, why don't we just give this to everybody? But there can be real bad negative consequences for the world. And he was aware of that. Seeing that been done in the past, with his inventions in a smaller way, but still. So, this is something that is, again, not just a problem of saying, oh, we got to do away with the patents. The problem is again, the whole society and the approach to patents and why they're there and all that stuff. So, each of these problems that we discuss here, it's always part of the bigger story.
What is the process forward? Like the timeline? Are we looking at having the first city, the research center, or is our hope to have that done in our lifetime, next 20 years, or is there a timeline, to move forward?
The crystal ball broke yesterday. We don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I kind of figured.
Really, there's so many variables. I mean, it would be very, very, very difficult and risky to say, okay, well, by 2020, we're going to build the first city. There's just too many variables. It depends very much on how much financing is achieved. They started a non-profit last year, a new non-profit, to build this new research center, and by asking for grants, applying for grants and so on. And they're setting that up with a website and so on and so forth. Sasha can talk about that better than me, perhaps, because you were there at Venus when they were doing it, weren't you?
Yeah. There's it's in final, let's say, development stage. The whole MPO thing. It's still basically just missing some dots on the I's and whatnot. But that is going to be the vehicle, let's say, that will be pushing for the next step, which would be one of two things: either a bigger research center that would maybe house somewhere around 100 or a couple hundred maybe people, or if there would be a bigger, let's say, interest come around, then a whole test city, or at least 1/8 of a test city to start with. Something like that. So those are the practical next steps. As far as timeline, like Sue said, saying anything concrete is really hard. It can range up to, if somebody comes tomorrow with $1 billion, it can happen really fast. And then it can go to, maybe in 10 years if, a whole bunch of things happen. So it's very hard to say. But as far as the best that we can do right now, there was a big call out for architects, for designers, for engineers, and now for different problem solvers and people that mine for data and statisticians and things like that. And that's basically directly correlated to this first next step that they want to do. And so the proposal is going to, let's say, get a lot more real in the next few months, and through the nonprofit, which is going to be called resource-based economy. We're hoping that we can make that next step as soon as possible.
That's excellent.
Okay. So let's do. Go ahead,
let me
Sue.
just say, we need to have not just those architects and engineers and so on, but we need to have them informed as well, and to have studied these ideas, so that they understand the concepts behind the designs and they can design accordingly as well. So there's a whole learning process for them as well.
So you guys going to have like an applications submitting thing on the website for these architects, or how's that going to work? Okay.
Yeah, no.
All right, so let's get to some viewer questions. We'll try to get through these quickly because we're kind of getting long on time here. So Kitty Cat asks...
I'm having a ball.
So am I. It's horrible.
Dog out for a piece, so we're all right.
Okay, our viewer Kitty Cat asks, so what would you do for, like, if somebody has a felony or they're a registered pedophile? Is there like a council that says that you can't be here?
Well, that's a really specific question. I think that for, like Sue said before, for the first, test city, or the first maybe even couple of cities, we would have people there that would be there, let's say, with a purpose, meaning that they would have some kind of an expertise, either be a scientist or a researcher or something like that. I would say there is a safe assumption that we would try to avoid people that would have prior, let's say, violent crimes committed in that test environment, because that might create problems. But in the long term, of course, these are things that need to be revised through means of people that are that are in that area, meaning clinical psychologists, behavioral scientists, things like that, so that they would have to go through some kind of research and see if these people can be helped. But that's more of a long-term thing. So.
And then I assume there would be like some kind of a police force because if something happens inside.
Well, again, yeah, I mean, again, just because of the nature of the research center being located somewhere in a country that already has, police and military and many different, let's say regular government organizations that we know of, then some of these things might be deferred to them in the transitional period. But yeah, so again, we don't advocate for an overnight boycott of military or overnight boycott of police and all these things. These are all transitional tasks that will be done over time. So in the meantime, that still needs to be addressed.
There would be more problem solvers than law. I can't think of the word now. People that enforce the law, they would be more problem solvers. Today, well, what am I going to tell you guys where you live? Today they whip out the gun and they shoot you. But there needs to be an understanding of why the person is doing whatever they're doing. So we need to have problem solvers, not shooters, or any kind of aggression on the part of the law enforcement. Mm-hmm. We wouldn't need all these things in a resource-based economy anyway, because when you've removed all the vested interests, when everybody has everything that they need to live extremely well, much better than we live today, we're going to see a reduction in crime that's tremendous. I think it's so many things that will be benefited by this system that it's hard sometimes to keep them all in your head at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Another thing she has here, she says it's food available, but I want to restate, I think she's kind of insinuating is, so how does the food system work? So obviously it would be just a resource-based economy, so if you're hungry, you just go down and you can just grab what you want?
Yeah. There's various ways. I mean, the production of food would be based on the requests of the public, just like today. The supermarkets know how many of what product to put in the shelves by how many are sold. Well, so we will know how much to produce of lettuces or mushrooms or whatever by the amount that the people take. So if we need to get 1,000 lettuces for Monday, we'll have 1,000 lettuces, because it will all be data that's accumulated. Every time you pass your barcode through the supermarket checkout, that takes one away from whatever's in the warehouse. So it's all that's done already, and so we can go to the research center, the distribution center, and just take what we need when we need it, or we can have it delivered to our home. We can have things delivered. I mean, they're starting to deliver small things by drone, but we can have vacuum tubes under the ground that can send things to our home and be with us in moments.
Yeah.
The system of vacuum, they do use it already, and they have done for years.
Banks.
They've used it in the old black and white television days as well. A small tube that in the supermarket, when there's a lot of notes in the till, in the cash register, the girl will put them in a tube, and then they put it inside a tube and it goes up. You must have seen them.
I've never seen it at a supermarket,
movies,
but we had them at the bank where you go through the bank drive-thru and you put your stuff in there.
Exactly. Well, they exist already on a much larger scale. So we're talking about, you could have, furniture sent to your house if you wanted a new coffee table or whatever, you could have it sent to your house. When you've got all this thing, you're not talking about stealing and stuff like that, all that sort of thing is going to disappear.
Which I think is actually really interesting, because I've gathered so much information. What I like now is that talking to y'all is that you have a really good point about the system with the tubes and Amazon and the supermarket. The systems are already there.
I was going to say, who's building that tube right now, the big one for transportation? Tesla, ain't he?
I think it's Tesla. Yeah. It's up free now. But he put it up on the web for free for other people to look at. But yeah, he wants to create a tube that will send shipments from like LA to New York in 14 minutes or something. And you're right, though. Amazon already has all the things that we're talking about. Walmart already has all the things that we're talking about. It's just putting them together in one large. And I mean, AI. I think it'd be more of a program more than an AI, like a smart program that could distribute these things because we already have all of that. And you're absolutely right. That's something that's really interesting. That a perspective that I didn't have before talking to y'all. Yeah. That was excellent.
And it's the cybernation, really, I think more. I mean, the AI is obviously going to be a part of this, but the cybernation is what we're looking at, which is the mixing of the machines with the computers. And that's what automates it. That's what the automation is. Yeah. So it's the cybernation that we're looking at, a cybernated system of government, because it's we have people making decisions now that, as Sasha said a while ago, that we don't need decisions making about. Yeah. It should just be automatic. When there's flooding in an area. I mean, look at the mess the States is in now after the hurricane. They had no provisions. They're going to build up the houses the same way as they had before. We're going to see the same cheap buildings built up again in God knows how many times in how many years. People without electricity still in Puerto Rico. They knew the damn thing was coming. Why? And they have these problems every year. Why haven't they been looking at a solution before? Because the politicians don't know what needs to be done.
Yeah, if you're in an island in the middle of the ocean, that should be something that should be basic. We should have something for hurricane coverage because that's going to happen.
We need to look at these things and say, okay, well, if the buildings get blown down every year, how about we try these domes?
Yeah.
For example, because the buildings at Venus, by the way, they're not all perfect domes. They're either dome and something else or a round shape in some way, a tube, as it were, so that the wind just goes over them, doesn't push against them.
George Green was making some stuff like that too. So that Gage the Navigator asks, so who will build for the Venus project? So I assume you're too far to think right now to get contractors, but is it going to be more of having contractors? I suppose you'd have to have contractors first and then until you can get the robots implemented and then go from there.
Yeah, definitely. We would have to. The first city or the first couple of cities would be a mix of traditional, let's say, construction building and whatnot. But we would want to, of course, incorporate as many of the design things that we've talked about, just because, of course, they're stronger, of course, they're more efficient, and all that, and all those things. So even though they would be, for starters, done with, let's say, conventional, quote unquote, construction techniques, they would still have these properties. But in the future, after a first few cities, then in those cities we would want to develop automated systems to build these structures, and of course different using different methods depending on what kind of structures, how big, how many of them we're going to use. And we've seen some of this stuff has already been demonstrated pretty clearly that can be made. 3D printing, even on a bigger scale, can already be done for, let's say, things that you don't necessarily need a lot of, and then for buildings that you need a lot of, you can prefabricate, all the things. Jacque has the technique of extruding buildings, which is not implemented anywhere yet. To our knowledge, that you can also do, but that takes more resources, meaning, you need to have a city, you need to have the resources to build those first. But then once you do that, the buildings can get really cheap and you can build them really fast. A lot of these buildings that are built in Venus would be pulled off of molds, just like plastic molds that you see today. And you can pull things off of them with half of the furniture already built in, things like that. So we have so much options, so much technology, so much opportunity. I mean, it would be it's the fact that we still have homeless people and people that have nowhere to live is just beyond.
And I think once you get that automation there, just think of how quickly they get buildings out. Yeah. Boom, boom, boom. Oh, man.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great.
I'll let you ask next one.
James Burris's.
Go ahead and read that whole statement.
All right. So James says, I don't see a question mark. We talked about the average of 4 hours a work day, and that's if everyone does it. And you just said it's choice. I know for a fact, like 80% of people, if given the choice, won't work. I don't know where you got that number. I love it when they say that stuff. So the other people will still have to work night and day. And when you have two guys getting the same stuff as one is working and one isn't, there's going to be a rift in the community from the people that think others don't earn their keep. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. This is a very typical question. What will motivate people to do things? First of all, we need to look at why people aren't motivated today. Mm-hmm. All right, because that question comes from today's way of thinking. You know, we've got boring jobs that are bad for our health, that do nothing to stimulate us mentally, that we're just there because we need a wage at the end of the month because we've got so much stuff we've got to pay for, you know, and people get home, they're absolutely exhausted. All they want to do is crash on the couch and have a beer, you know. So we don't have that motivation today. We don't have anything really interesting. Unless you've got a lot of money, then you can do what you want. But the normal Joe blogs on the street, you know, he's very much limited by what he can afford. So his life is going to be reduced to what he can do. But in a resource-based economy, we won't have those ties. We'll be, if we do work, it will be in some way putting something back into society, whether it's being an inventor or a scientist or an architect or something. You know, it will be something that we can offer back to society, a society that is giving us so much. And we will have time for ourselves to go out and climb mountains or travel the world or study the stars or what time to be with the family even. Today we don't get time with our family. The quality time they talk about sometimes absolute rubbish. So, you know, we'd have time to be with it. So our lives are going to be much more richer and we won't feel this tiredness, this lack of incentive. You know, the laziness that we see in people today is provoked, like all human behavior, from the environment. So when we change that environment to a much more stimulating one, where people are much freer to do what they really want, what their passion is, we're not going to see many lazy people.
He was saying, okay, people are going to sit home, they're not going to want to do anything, but it's not that they're not going to want to do anything, it's that what they're doing at home is going to be their passion. So maybe they're a stay-at-home mom, so maybe therefore they'd want to be going down to the center and watching the kids or something, you know, something like that. It would just be transitioning into that. Yeah. And that's what you don't think of when you first hear this stuff.
Oh, absolutely. You're thinking we still have to go to work and package, you know, stuff in a box and send it out, but that's not going to be it anymore. Right. All those meaningless manual jobs are going to be gone, you know, and then, like you said, we can start focusing on, you know, more science, more music, more of those things. I mean, who knows who might write the next, you know, greatest opera? It could be somebody from the Venus Project because they had the time to do it, you know.
And art and music and so on will be so much more advanced as well because there'll be so many more materials and tools for people to use that are being discovered. New kinds of paint, new kinds of all sorts of things, you know, new kinds of instruments and so on.
Yeah, I think a lot of these questions are more about
very rich too.
Changing one's perspective than it is because you got to understand.
It's a different way of thinking.
Yeah, because you really have to. Well, when I read the questions, I was like, if people kind of understood the broad spectrum of the idea, you know,
it eliminates
a lot of those questions because all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, I don't have to work in that reference, but now I can go to work doing what I love and that type of thing. And like we talked about science and labs and everything else, or people working in Africa and America and coming up with things. It came to, I had a thought, you know, they say there's no cure for cancer because there's no money in it. Right. And this type of the Venus Project, there wouldn't have to be any money. So then there's no reason.
Exactly.
So we could. And then people around the world that are working for that cure because they know they can make money off of it. Now there's no money. So now everyone can work together and things will be.
So I always said getting rid of that monetary system is going to be huge.
Huge. Absolutely. Yeah.
So let's go on to I don't know, say his name, Dava 16. So he says, so essentially a Star Trek style future, but what's the point if everything is given to you? What do you do? What is the purpose? We need struggle and challenge. It gives you purpose. So the next, then he kind of points here at the end. So is the next purpose, you know, just traveling to space?
Well, I think that kind of is an extension of the question that we were talking about already. But I mean, people, I guess, conclude that there won't be any challenges anymore. And that's just not the case. Like, just because of the damage that we've already done in the last 2 centuries to this earth, there's going to be challenges. Like, there is a lot of challenges just to do cleanup to the environment and all that stuff. And there are already very likely going to be long-term consequences of our actions that we're going to have to mediate to some extent, for sure. So there's going to be no shortage of challenges in the years to come. And also, you know, it's there are other existential challenges that we're still going to have, you know, figuring out how things work, all that stuff. We're still, and in so many ways, we're still kind of in the beginning. And so we're going to have a lot more resources and time to actually try and find those things out. And that's going to be the challenge. And I think it already is for some people today like that. Maybe the ones that are really on the borderline of the known science that are kind of doing experiments to find out things that are not known. And those are the kind of drivers that we would have in the future.
Yeah. Apart from that, I think you'd be able to make your own challenges, right? Because you won't be limited by what you can spend.
Yeah, very true.
You can't go to university. How many youngsters can't go to university because they can't afford the extortionate fees?
Yeah,
and so all their hopes and dreams are being squashed because they don't have the money. And how many people do we lose? Jacque always used to say this, you know, how many possible Da Vinci's or Marie Curie's are dying of hunger in Africa and India?
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah, you have your own challenges.
We could be so much more advanced.
Oh, your own challenges on your hobby.
We can come up with our own challenges. When we see there's a problem, we can having a better education, because that's another topic as well, the education that we receive. Having a better education will prepare us with tools to move through life and look for challenges and ways to solve them.
I think people think of challenges now.
It's a huge mind shift.
Oh, yeah. That's a challenge.
Which one do you want me to read? The Quantum Explorer? All right, we have another question from Quantum Explorer. He or she asked...
She's Lauren
Hansen.
Oh, she.
Oh. Hi, Lauren. So she asks, would there be limitations or council involvement on child conception, birth, and rearing? Population control, in other words.
Yeah. An educated population doesn't need controlling. And today we don't have an educated population, especially the women. I mean, the kids get taught at school so much, but there's a whole lot more to sexual education that's being missed out. And so we're getting a lot of unwanted pregnancies, difficulty for women to abort when they can't have any more for whatever reason. There's no free access in many countries to birth control. It's a religious problem in many places as well. So if we can get around all of that and educate the girls, especially, as well as the boys, obviously, but educate the girls for their bodies, then we're going to find that the girls will have many less children than they do today. We're not going to see all these traditions of get married and have 2 kids or 5 kids if you're in India and you need a few of them to survive because the death rate is so high and so on. All this kind of thing will have disappeared. And so with there being so many other things that girls can do in life, they're not going to get tied down with kids to start off with. Add to that the fact that we will understand that we cannot live we can't live outside the carrying capacity of the planet. If the planet can feed 10 billion, that's how many we have to be. And people need to understand that. So they will automatically, okay, well, we won't have any more kids. And a lot of people don't want kids anyway. They feel pressured to have them by society and the norms, as it were. So it all comes down to education. And of course, what people think of as a population problem nowadays, in reality, most of the time, it's just because we have an absolutely abysmal distribution system. You know, we've got people starving in Africa, but we're throwing away tons and tons and tons of food in the cities in the West. Now, obviously, we can't send it with today's system to Africa to feed the people, but we wouldn't need to in a resource-based economy because all the cities in Africa would have their own food production systems, as would all the cities. Mm-hmm. You know, you're going to get local food production there, so they don't have to bring kiwis from New Zealand to Spain. You know, they'll grow them in hydroponics in their own cities. So there's, we don't have an overpopulation problem today. What we have is a poor distribution system.
So this guy's got a lot of questions, but I want to just pull out some good ones here. Eyes of Infinity. So he says, how would drugs be regulated? Would there be a regulation on drugs?
Okay, this is another question that is asked with today's mentality. Sorry, Sasho. Do you want to talk about this one?
Well, I mean, it's a similar. I mean, the answers to this kind of questions, let's say, are fairly similar, I guess, from me or from Sue, just because, many of these are just rooted in today's reference, which makes a lot of sense because, of course, these are big problems in today's society, and a lot of people just don't know who to trust anymore, and that makes a lot of sense. But in the future, again, as far as any kind of regulations go, when the whole population is educated enough and also where you remove this bias, and when you remove the fact that people have a vested interest to sell, a certain drug over the other because that, is what they produced and it makes them money, and all sorts of these potential for lies and miscommunications and trying to present things, the way that they are not, just in order to sell them and all this stuff. All these problems are today's point of view problems. When you remove these biases, when you remove the reasons why we have these problems today, then you won't see that in a saner society. There would be it would be absolutely no reason for us to put out a drug that has not been tested, that has, extensive negative side effects, that is not as effective as something that's already out there. All these reasons. There's just no mechanism for it. There's no reason for it. There's no benefit to anyone for doing that. And the value system shift here is big, because as soon as you have that kind of attitude, then you understand that any kind of negative action that you do personally will come and bite you in the ass at the end, because you are kind of destroying your own environment in whatever shape or form that is. And so that's going to be something that you just do not want to do. And a lot of people don't have that kind of worldview today.
But something like marijuana would be like legal. I mean, obviously, I think legalizing stuff would obviously decriminalize and bring. It makes sense.
We need when we're talking about drugs like in that way, then we need to think about why people get stoned or get high or whatever. What is the reason for them doing that, and eliminate the cause?
Yeah. And
just yesterday, or the day before, I was watching some of Cabal, who has worked for years with real hardline drug addicts in Canada. And they're all people that have had tremendously horrendous childhoods. They've been abused in one way or another. And so that it's an escapism for them. Life has just given them so many kicks, and they aren't able to handle it anymore. And they end up trying to escape by using drugs. So when they don't have that emptiness in them, when they haven't been abused, when everybody treats each other like human beings, then there won't be this interest in escaping mentally, whatever way, whether it's with mushrooms, with marijuana, with coke, whatever. If people do want to take drugs, nobody's going to say, no, you can't. But they will have all the information about what the drug can do to your body, whether it's good or whether it's bad.
All right.
There will be studies made, serious scientific studies made, to see the results. And when it becomes obvious that something is bad, then you will get the information that's going to be bad for you.
Mm. Okay, last question here. I want to tie two of these together. So he's got, how are animals going to be treated as a whole, and how does veganism fit into the Venus Project? So, because if people are there that want to eat steak, I mean, do you got cows caged up? How does that work?
Yeah, this is a pretty popular question, especially in the last, let's say, 5 years or so, or whatnot. I mean, Jacque has really considered the meat industry, really inefficient for a very long time. Anyway, but of course, also it has a huge negative impact on the environment. So all those things taken in consideration, and the fact that lab meat is now becoming more and more accessible, I think that's a problem that we won't have anymore, especially when, again, you eliminate the monetary incentive, which today is very strong. The meat industry is huge, and the meat is very cheap considering how much resources actually get wasted or put into the development of meat, or the growing of meat, so to speak. And of course, there's also the moral implications, which is something that seems likely to evolve more and more towards not hurting other animals in that way. In the transition period, it's definitely something that is going to be considered, but ultimately, just it seems likely something that is going to be done away with not too far into the future.
I can see that. Yeah, I can kind of see the trend shifting right now. I'm a vegan myself, so Dusty's not.
No. I practice Buddhism just because I can't eat a carrot over a burger. I'm sorry. So.
Well, I am too. But I think of the two of us who is not. So I guess we got 2-on-2 situation here. For me, it was really kind of a personal. And I don't even want to say a decision. In some ways, it was just kind of laid out in front of me, and it was the path that was super easy for me to take. I guess I was lucky to have an ex-girlfriend who was a vegan and also an extraordinary cook. So I had absolutely no problem with eating everything that she made. And then in the process learned to make things for myself too. And then also just, honestly, I never knew in the 29 years of my life that I was eating meat, I never really knew that it was, so damaging to the environment. That aspect was never presented to me.
And even damaging to the body.
That was just something that I haven't really thought of before, honestly. And now, of course, it's a part of my life, but it was more of a personal decision for me.
Since this will be our last question, I want to first say thank you both, and for taking the time out of the day and whatnot, because I know we're all at different places. So, but yeah, to wrap this up, I think we want to ask, how can people support the Venus Project? What can they do to assist or find local members and assist them in what they're doing? What kind of things do you have out there that people can research? That way, after watching this, if they'd like to, they can go ahead and reach out to y'all.
Yeah. Well, the best place to get information is the website, www.thevenusproject.com. And there are various tabs along the top that you can look at. And there's one that says Learn More. Mm-hmm. And that's it, how to get involved. And when you click that, there's different teams and different options of ways that you can help. But one of the main ways, if you find that there isn't a team, for example, if you don't want to join social media, or you don't want to join the graphics, or you're not very human relations or whatever, but you still want to do something, there is also a list of the points of contact that we have around the world that you can contact. The Facebooks that they have as well, that you can join the Facebook and participate in the discussions there. And also, the main thing is to get the information out there. So watch the videos on the official YouTube channel. Learn about it yourself. Investigate it. If you don't want to call it learning or studying, investigate. Look up other things as well. Check it out. Ask questions on the Facebook or whatever. Find out about it. Become well-versed so that you can tell others about it as well without making a mistake. Because as it's so complex, at the beginning, you tend to find people catch on to the ideas that resonate with them because it sounds like something they like already, that they agree with already. And then other things that they haven't really heard about yet, they make their own ideas up. And so we get lots of confusions out there. Mm-hmm. So it's very important to learn correctly so that you're not giving out You know, you're not saying blue when in fact it's green, for example, you know?
Well, in addition to that, there is also just the way of donating. If you can't donate your time or your activity, there's also a way to donate to the project. For now, directly on the main website. You can do it on a one-off basis, or you can do you do a repeat monthly donation if you want. We have people that help that way. A lot of times that's easier for people than to actually invest a lot of time in it. But yeah, like Sue said, other than that, get through that website and get involved. There's a lot of ways that you can get involved, and there's more and more as we go. So we're adding new teams, new projects that we're going to expand on. Maybe another thing that we didn't mention, a lot of people enjoy very much documentaries in today's day and age. So I would suggest the documentary "The Choice Is Ours." That's the newest documentary, and we've been fortunate to work with a very good animator that volunteered also a lot of his time to help us out. So it's definitely something to check out. It's a little over an hour and a half, but it breaks down the whole idea very well, and it's a pretty well made documentary. So for people that want to check that out, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah, I watched it. It was good.
If you're in the States, you can visit the center. Well, if anywhere in the world, you can go and visit the center. But if you have the opportunity to visit the center and have the tour, which Roxanne takes you around the center and so on, and it's really interesting. You come away with so much more information as well, and being there and experiencing it and so on is a great way to learn yourself and to help others afterwards when you talk to them,
That's excellent.
And
maybe
the tours
give the
are
book as a gift, because there's a book on Kindle now as well. There's not just the paperback version, which may soon be a hardback version, but there is a Kindle version, and then there are lectures. So if you're wanting to give somebody a gift for Christmas, the book "The Best That Money Can't Buy" is a really good idea, whether it's in physical form on Kindle, or maybe if you just want a small gift, there's some individual lectures for about $5 now that you can just listen to as many times as you want to on specific topics. That are really, really, really interesting. Things like competent democracy, free will, human nature and human behavior, because that's a huge thing, the whole human behavior thing. So it's worth looking into.
Well,
those are other little ways that you can spread the word.
Well, excellent. Well,
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. When do you want us back?
As soon as possible.
I would let us know if you got any progress updates that we can talk about, and then we'll have you back.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a lot of fun. Well, I want to close then. I want to thank you, Sue and Sasho. I really appreciate you guys taking the time of your day and clearing up a lot of these questions and confusions that I had even when I did the episode. And I'm sorry to the viewers that we didn't get to everybody's question. We thought it wouldn't be this long, but we were having way too much fun. So I want to thank you both. I want to thank Dano for putting this all together. He does all that work. I just show up. So I want to thank everybody, and I hope you all have a wonderful day and check out the Venus Project.